You're only dipping your toes in the shallow end when it comes to understanding a group like Jehovah's Witnesses.
Hmm.
Well, fear not, intrepid listeners. Today, we're diving deep, deep into their relationship with the Bible.
Always a fascinating topic.
Totally. And we're looking specifically at this article from their official website, jw.org. It's titled, Have Jehovah's Witnesses Changed the Bible to Fit Their Beliefs?
Intriguing question.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always interesting to see how different groups interpret a text as influential as the Bible.
Right. Especially when those interpretations kind of lead to beliefs that are, well, different from what a lot of people believe.
For sure.
So this article, it kind of jumps right in, denying that they've changed anything in the Bible, to match their beliefs.
Right.
They say that they formed their beliefs over years and years of studying all sorts of different translations
That's it.
before they, eventually created their own version, the New World Translation of the Holy Scriptures. But some of their core beliefs, let's just say they're pretty unique. Ready to unpack some of them.
Absolutely. Let's dive in.
Okay, so let's start with one that really sets them apart, the Trinity.
Right.
Most Christian denominations see the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit as one God, all together.
Yeah.
But Jehovah's Witnesses, they've got a different perspective on that.
They do. It's a very distinct view.
Okay, so break it down for me. What's their take on the whole Trinity thing?
Well, they believe in one God,
Okay.
whom they refer to as Jehovah, and they see Jesus as his son, separate and subordinate to him.
Okay, so not part of the same, divine essence.
Right, exactly. And
Huh.
this, it's not just some abstract theological point either. It really shapes their entire worldview and how they interact with the Bible.
So how do they back this up? I mean, the Trinity, it's a pretty central idea for a lot of Christians.
It is. Well, they point to verses like Deuteronomy 6.4. It states, Jehovah our God is one Jehovah. They also bring up 1 Corinthians 8.6, which says, there is but one God, the Father, of whom are all things, and we unto him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, by whom are all things, and we by him.
Okay.
And they even cite, Jesus himself in John 14.28, where he says, the Father is greater than I.
Wow, using Jesus' own words to support their view. I can already see how they're carefully choosing, which parts of the Bible they're using to make their case. What else stands out?
Well, their view of hell, or rather the lack of hellfire, is another big difference.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you won't find any images of, eternal torment or anything like that in their teachings. They believe the wages of sin is death, and that's it.
So, no, fiery underworld for them. So what happens to people after they die, according to them?
They believe in everlasting destruction, which they see as a complete end of existence, not eternal suffering. To support this, they look at verses like Romans 6.23, the soul that sinneth, it shall die. They also reference Ezekiel 18.4 and 20, which talk about, the death of the soul. And they also cite 2 Thessalonians 1.9, which mentions the everlasting destruction of those who oppose God.
Everlasting destruction. That's a pretty intense phrase. It makes you wonder what they think that actually looks like, right? Okay, moving on to another core belief, God's kingdom. What's their take on that? Is it some sort of spiritual thing or something more concrete?
For Jehovah's Witnesses, God's kingdom is a very real, very literal government
Oh, wow.
that will one day rule over the earth.
Really?
Yeah, replacing all the human governments.
Whoa, so they're expecting a pretty major shakeup of how the whole world works.
Yeah.
That's a bold statement. Where in the Bible do they find support for this idea?
One of their key verses is Daniel 2.44, which describes a kingdom that shall never be destroyed and will break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms.
So they're really focused on this idea of an actual physical kingdom here on Earth. How does that belief affect their daily lives and how they view the world?
Oh, it definitely informs their sense of urgency in sharing their message. They see themselves as preparing people for this coming kingdom.
Okay, so we've got these 3, really distinct beliefs. No Trinity, no hellfire, and an actual kingdom coming to Earth. It's clear they're approaching the Bible with a very specific lens.
Yeah.
What I'm curious about is how they reconcile their interpretations with the fact that a lot of other Christians read the same verses and come to very different conclusions.
That's where their own translation of the Bible comes in. The New World Translation.
Oh, right.
Which they primarily use.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
And it's been the subject of some controversy. to say the least.
Right. Some scholars say that it's biased towards their own, doctrines, but the article insists that they didn't change the Bible to fit their beliefs. They just, they translated it based on what they understand the original languages to mean.
It's a nuanced argument for sure, and it brings up some really interesting questions about, about the role of translation and interpretation in shaping religious beliefs.
Yeah, totally. I mean, how much of what we believe comes from the words themselves versus like how those words are presented and explained to us?
That's a question that goes way beyond just Jehovah's Witnesses. It applies to, any group that relies on a sacred text.
That's a good point.
How do we know what to believe? Who gets to decide what the right interpretation is?
These are some pretty deep waters we're wading into here. So before we get totally swept away, let's move on to some more specific examples of how their translation choices actually reflect their, unique beliefs.
Yeah.
Are you ready to dive even deeper?
Oh, absolutely. Let's do it.
Yeah.
You remember how we talked about their belief that Jesus is like distinct from God?
Yeah.
Well, one of the key verses they use for this is John 1:1. Most translations, they render that verse as, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
Yeah, I've definitely heard that one before. How do they translate it differently?
Well, their New World Translation, it renders it as, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was O God.
Oh.
You notice the lowercase g there on God?
Yeah, that's subtle, but it makes a huge difference, right? Theologically speaking, I mean.
Exactly. By putting Word as a God, it kind of emphasizes Jesus' divinity, but still keeps him separate from God the Father.
So even though, the article says they didn't change the Bible to fit, what they already believe, it seems like their translation choices definitely line up with their doctrines, right?
It's an interesting example, of how translation can become like a battleground for how you interpret things theologically.
Yeah.
And this whole debate, it's not new either. Remember, Jehovah's Witnesses, they formed a lot of their core beliefs way before they even published the New World Translation.
That's right.
Like back in the late 1800s, they were already, challenging a lot of those mainstream Christian doctrines, and they were using existing translations to back up their views.
Yeah, they even pull quotes from like early issues of their magazine Zion's Watchtower to show how their stances on, the Trinity, hellfire, God's kingdom, those go way back.
It just shows that, their approach to the Bible has been really consistent.
Yeah, consistent and deliberate.
Yeah, they've been engaging in this process of like interpreting and reinterpreting the Bible for well over a century.
Wow. So it's not just about one translation. It's about this whole like theological framework that they've been building over time. But going back to like the average person out there, what's the takeaway from all this? Let's say, you're talking to a Jehovah's Witness at your door. How can understanding, their unique approach to the Bible help someone, navigate that interaction?
Well, I think the most important thing is to, approach any religious group with respect and with a genuine willingness to try to understand where they're coming from.
Right.
Even if you don't agree with their beliefs.
Yeah.
Listening to their reasoning can actually be really helpful.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's easy to get defensive, right? When someone's like challenging what we believe.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And with Jehovah's Witnesses specifically, understanding that they really, really rely on the Bible is key. They're not just making these beliefs up. They're basing them on specific passages and how they interpret them.
Right.
Even if those interpretations are different from, what you might be used to.
So if someone's interested in like really having a meaningful conversation, it'd be good to like be familiar with the verses that they're likely to use.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe even, think about how you interpret those verses.
That's a good idea.
And remember, even though the article, defends their translation choices, they also say they use other translations too.
Oh, really?
Especially when they're studying with people who, prefer a different version.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid to, bring your own preferred version to the conversation.
That's interesting. I guess it's kind of like a friendly theological debate.
Yeah.
Comparing notes, and just exploring different ways of looking at things.
It's a good reminder that even within a religion as big as Christianity, there's a ton of diversity of thought.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of diversity, anything else from this article that we should touch on before we wrap up? Anything that really stuck out to you?
Well, going back to their belief in God's kingdom,
Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting how they connect that belief to their everyday lives.
Right, right.
Remember, they see themselves as getting people ready for this coming kingdom.
Yeah, yeah. So how does that play out in practical terms?
They put a lot of emphasis on, spreading their message, like
Hmm.
going door to door and sharing their beliefs. They also have like really strict moral guidelines,
Okay.
which they believe are super important for, living in a way that aligns with God's will.
It's interesting how a theological belief can have such specific, impacts on people's actions and the choices that they make.
Yeah, it really highlights that religious beliefs aren't just, abstract ideas. They really do have real world
Yeah,
consequences.
yeah, for sure. Okay, so before we get to our mind-bending outro, let's do a super quick recap. We've been exploring how Jehovah's Witnesses say they haven't changed the Bible to fit their own beliefs. Instead, they really emphasize that they formed these unique doctrines like
Hmm.
rejecting the Trinity and hellfire and their belief in a literal kingdom on earth through years and years of studying existing translations.
Right.
We've also talked about the New World Translation
Yeah.
and the interesting and sometimes controversial ways that it reflects their beliefs.
We've also seen how their beliefs, while being, different from mainstream Christianity, are really rooted in how they interpret specific biblical passages.
Mm.
And we've emphasized how important it is to engage with them, respectfully,
Right.
and recognizing that their worldview, even if it seems different, it comes from a genuine commitment to the Bible as they understand it.
Okay, deep divers, get ready for a final thought that just might leave you pondering the mysteries of faith and interpretation. Think about those door-to-door visits for a second. Imagine you're the one opening the door, and there's someone standing there who really believes that like the world is about to change.
Mm.
Like a kingdom ruled directly by God. It makes you think, what if they're right?
Right.
What if like their interpretation of the Bible, even though it's so different, is actually the key to understanding what's going to happen next?
It's definitely a thought-provoking idea, isn't it? It really makes us, question our own assumptions about the future,
Yeah.
and how faith might shape that future.
And it reminds us that, the Bible with all its like different translations and interpretations can lead people to some wildly different conclusions.
Yeah, for sure.
For Jehovah's Witnesses, it's like a roadmap to a real physical kingdom here on earth.
Right.
But for other people, it might be, a guide to personal salvation or just a source of moral teachings.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole exploration so fascinating. It's
Mm.
not about figuring out who's got the right interpretation,
Yeah.
but it's more about appreciating all the different ways people can think about it, all
Mm.
coming from just one text.
So, the next time you hear about Jehovah's Witnesses, or maybe even, you run into them at your door, remember that their beliefs, even if they seem, uh, you know, out there, they come from a really deep and sincere engagement with the Bible. They've spent over a century building this theological framework that guides their actions and shapes how they see the world. And maybe, just maybe, by taking this deep dive into their interpretations, we can all learn something new about, ourselves and the never-ending search for meaning
Well said.
in a world that's full of mystery. Until next time, keep diving.